So Paul wrote this letter because certain religious teachers had come to the region of Galatia after Paul had left. Paul had gone there. He had preached the gospel there. A lot of people believed in God and his grace. And then some religious teachers came into town and started calling into question everything that Paul had taught them. They were saying that God's love and acceptance depends on us and what we do, our goodness, our rule keeping, our adherence to certain rituals and traditions. Paul's been saying that God's love and acceptance depends on God and what he's done and how that changes everything. It sets us free in some deep and wide and beautiful ways. He wants to make the case that the good news of Christianity is not that you must find God, it's that God has found you. It's not that you must be good to get God's approval. It's that God approves you because he is good. I read a quote this morning, very poignant, that simply said, Jesus does all the verbs. In other words, all of the acting on our behalf is done by him. See, the deepest need and desire of the human heart is to be fully known and fully loved. And the gospel is the good news that you are. You are. Right now. Not at some time in the future when you're better, cleaner, or more put together, but right now. So when Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 1, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. He's saying, it's a done deal now. It's not that you have to get better, clean up your act, put things in your life right, and then God won't condemn you. No condemnation comes first. Paul wants us to know that. So Paul's purpose in this letter is to declare and defend that God's love is not conditioned on you doing certain things or becoming a certain way. He said at the beginning that we saw a few weeks ago that there's no other gospel other than the gospel of grace. In fact, he said, if anybody comes to you and tells you anything different about God and how God saves sinners beyond what I told you, it's a lie. It's false, he says. There is no other gospel than the gospel of grace. When you start adding stuff, our works, our faithfulness, our devotion, our goodnesses, our anything, the gospel ceases to be good news. And that's what the word gospel means, simply good news. Paul wrote to counter the yes, grace, but attitude that plagues us all when it comes to God. He wrote to combat the natural tendency we have to believe that we have to earn our place with God. That's what this whole letter is about. The religious teachers were just harping on the law, the law, the law. You must keep God's law if you want things between you and God to be right. But Paul has argued thoroughly that the law has its place. But that place is not to make you right with God. It doesn't have the power to do that. In fact, the law was given to show us how unright we are and how much we need God's grace. Martin Luther said, the law is a divinely sent Hercules to attack and kill the monster of self-righteousness. I love that. That's what it's for. In other words, the law levels us every time we start thinking we are better than we are or better than someone else. Now, there is nothing in this world that I have seen that illustrates this point more perfectly than a clip from Seinfeld, okay? And I'm going to show it to you in a second, but let me just sort of set it up real quick. I'm not going to give it away, okay, but Elaine, if you're familiar with the series, if you're not, you should be, shame on you. But Elaine in this scene represents what the law does, okay? George, neurotic George Costanza, represents all of us. And the hairpiece, okay, that bald George is wearing represents our foolish efforts to cover our badness to the point of thinking that we're better. So, Danny, roll the clip.
You fixed me up with a bald woman.
Bald?
Yeah. That's right.
Do you see the irony here? You're rejecting somebody because they're bald.
So?
You're bald!
No, I'm not. I was bald. Elaine.
I don't like this thing! And here's what I'm doing with it!
Okay, so, I mean, is there a better illustration under the sun for what the law does? All of our silly and foolish attempts to cover things up, and then based on our perceived success in covering those things up, we automatically start thinking we're better than we are, or we're better than other people. In one of the next scenes, it's so funny, George is at the coffee shop with Jerry, and he says that Elaine ripping off his hairpiece was the best thing that ever happened to him. And he says, with a huge smile on his face, I feel like my old self again. Totally inadequate, completely insecure, paranoid, neurotic. It's a pleasure. So the law exposes us for who we are. It's like a mirror that we look into that shows us who we really are, not who we like to think ourselves to be. It shows us our deep need, our blemishes. Here are some ways that I've distinguished law and grace over the years. Some phrases that I think are helpful. The law accuses us. Grace acquits us. The law exposes us. Grace exonerates us. The law diagnoses us. Grace delivers us. The law blames the best of us. Grace saves the worst of us. So the law has its place. Paul is not saying that the law doesn't have its place. It does have its place. But it's not typically the place that we think it has. It's there to expose us, to unmask us. So the religious teachers had it wrong. The law was not given to show the way of salvation. It was given to show the need of salvation. That's what it was for. They had reversed it. They said the law was given to show the way of salvation, and your keeping of it, your doing of it is the only hope you have to ensure that God will accept you, that God will love you, that God will approve of you, that God will let you in, that God will be your friend. But they had it wrong. The law was not given to show the way of rescue or the way of salvation. It was given to show the need for it. Well, in these verses, the ones that I read a few minutes ago, Paul is pleading with them to not go back under law. In other words, don't treat the law as a way of making yourself right with God. That's a recipe for slavery. He says in verse 9, why do you want to go back again and become slaves once more to the weak and useless spiritual principles of this world? Now, I hung out at that verse yesterday for a while. That verse, why do you want to go back again and become slaves once more to the weak and useless spiritual principles of this world? I mean, what is he talking about? That's what I wanted to really dive into yesterday in my prep time. What is he talking about when he refers to the weak and useless spiritual principles of this world? I mean, it seems serious, super serious. He's essentially saying that the weak and useless spiritual principles of this world rob us of freedom. It's a pretty serious thing. So what is he talking about? This is their issue. He in one verse, he identifies the primary issue that he's addressing in this letter. So what's he talking about? Well, a lot of people have been taught that he's referring to licentious, immoral, bad behavior. But he's not. He's not talking about bad behavior here. He's talking about bad belief. Now, as far back as I can remember, I was taught that worldliness, which is just another way of saying the same thing, that worldliness was all about lifestyle. That a worldly person was a person who was self-indulgent, a person who hung out at the wrong places with the wrong people. A worldly person is someone who has no regard for morality or God's standards and lives to satisfy their own desires. They use bad language and they do bad things. That's a worldly person. A non-worldly person, on the other hand, or a Christian, was someone who stayed away from all that stuff. They were devout. They were disciplined. They didn't sound like non-Christians. They didn't like the things that non-Christians like. That's how worldliness has been understood for a long time. In fact, entire industries were born because of this assumption. Industries. The Christian music industry, the Christian movie industry, even the Christian book industry were all born to offer Christian alternatives to worldliness. Now, I'm not saying that stuff is bad. I've written Christian books myself. I'm just saying that entire industries were born out of this assumption that this is what worldliness is. But none of that is what Paul is talking about here. It's not what he's referring to here in this verse. All you have to do to know what he means by the weak and useless spiritual principles of this world is to read the next verse. Verse 10, you're trying to earn favor with God. You're trying to gain favor with God by doing certain things and observing certain rituals, adhering to certain traditions. G.K. Chesterton once said that tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. So he's not decrying tradition here, but when you depend on tradition to save you, adherence to certain traditions to save you, religious or otherwise, that's where Paul says it's a dead end. In other words, what he's saying is true worldliness. What he's talking about when he says the weak and useless spiritual principles of this world, true worldliness is thinking that you can be good enough or do enough or become enough or stay far away enough from the bad stuff that God will love you, that God will bless you. Someone asked me years ago in a radio interview, they asked me this question. Considering the moral decay in our world, how would you define countercultural preaching? Countercultural is just this idea that we go against the culture, not with it. And so this person wanted to know my opinion on concerning the moral decay and things falling apart in our world. How would I define countercultural preaching? And I didn't answer it the way he thought I would. My answer was short. It was poignant. Countercultural preaching is preaching an it is finished message in a just do it world. Period. That's what it is. It's preaching rest in a world of work and performancism. It's preaching grace in a world of law. You don't have to be a sociologist to know that we live in a culture of asphyxiating performancism. It's the air that we breathe. It's the world that we live in. Performancism is the mindset that equates our identity and value directly with our performance. The money we earn, the car we drive, the schools we attend, those things aren't merely reflective of our occupation or our ability. They are reflective of us. They identify us. To a performancist, success equals life, and failure equals death. Performancism leads us to spend our lives trying to have it all, and do it all well, so that life becomes a hamster wheel of endless earning and proving and maintenance and management. And before long, we're living in a constant state of anxiety, fear, and exhaustion. Well, the church is supposed to be a respite from that stuff, a sanctuary from that stuff. But the church has embraced performancism full tilt. I was asked to write an op-ed piece for the Washington Post years ago to answer the question, why are so many younger people leaving the church or find Christianity or the church irrelevant? Why is this happening? And my main point in that piece was that an institution that's supposed to provide comfort and rest to those in need has embraced the same pressure cooker we find everywhere else. Everywhere else. Our do more, give more, serve more, try harder, get better, climb higher for God, books and sermons gives people the impression that Christianity is about our performance for God rather than God's performance for us. But that misses the main point, which is that Christianity is not about good people getting better. It's good news for real people coping with their failure to be good. That's what it is. After all, Jesus didn't say, "Come to me, all you who are tired and burdened, and I'll give you more to do." He said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, tired and burdened, and I will give you rest." And so, an institution, church, which is supposed to give people rest and respite from the performancism that exists all around us and the performancism that exists in our own hearts, which has been there since the Garden of Eden, has sort of bought into this performance mindset. The only thing they change about it is they say, rather than doing for yourself, just do for God. That's how they distinguish themselves. It's all about our work for God rather than God's work for us. The sacrifices we make for God rather than the sacrifice God made for us. It's all about our being good for God rather than the fact that God has always been good for us. That's the impression. Now, I don't know too many people that just come straight out and say it that way, but the impression that is left with all of the sort of do more, try harder, serve more, get better, climb higher, sacrifice more, stuff that makes its way into almost every sermon or every book out there, gives the impression, at least it implies, that this whole thing is about me and what I do, that the focus of the Christian faith is the life of the Christian. Thankfully, it's not. I'm very grateful that the focus of the Christian faith is not my life. I'm very grateful that the focus of the Christian faith is not your life. The focus of the Christian faith is the life, death, resurrection, and promised return of Jesus outside of us. In other words, the simplest way to put it is the heart of the Christian faith is good news, not good behavior or good advice. So, when Sunday mornings become one more venue for performance evaluation, can you blame people for wanting to stay home? We were talking about this at a recent board meeting, and we're always sort of evaluating how things are going, and one of the things that we discussed that I think by God's grace sets this place apart is that we intentionally don't guilt people into being here. We don't guilt people into serving here. We don't want to ever make you think that your Christianity is more serious if you're here more, if you serve more, if you give more. All that stuff's between an individual person and God. That's not what we want to do. So a lot of churches are filled because the people there have been given the impression, at least given the impression, that those of us who serve more, give more, do more, or hear more, we're demonstrating serious Christianity. There's pressure, there's guilt, there's fear that motivates. Well, we don't do that. We intentionally don't do that around here. Now, sometimes that makes things a little bit harder because some of you are too lazy to help with anything. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Totally kidding. We have an amazing team of volunteers, and we're adding to that team on a regular basis. But I mean, we don't just say this is what we believe. We don't just say that this is about rest and respite rather than working. We believe it. we do our best by God's grace to put it into practice. So like I said, in writing that op-ed piece to try and answer the question, why are so many people leaving church, younger people especially, or younger people not even interested in church? It's because Sunday mornings have become one more venue for performance evaluation. I've told you this story before, but I mentored this kid at the previous church that I pastored. He was in high school. We had a school associated with our church, and he was graduating and went to Vanderbilt, and super smart kid, super smart, very gifted. And about, 3 months into his time in college away, he reached out to me and he said, "Can you point out some churches in the area that I can go to?" And so I did. I had some people that I knew who pastored churches in that area in and around Nashville. And so I pointed him to those places. And he immediately got back to me and said, "I've been to all of those. Do you have any others?" And so I picked up the phone and called him. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Tullian, I get so much pressure from every sector of my life. I get it from my teachers. I get it from my coaches." He had a part-time job. He said he got it from his boss. He would even get it sometimes from his parents. A tremendous amount of pressure to perform. And he said, "I just need to go to one place once a week for 1 hour to be reminded that it is finished. I'm going to get performance evaluations as soon as I walk out the door from everyone all the time. And I just need that weekly reminder that I am grounded because of what God has done for me, not because of what I do or don't do." See, Paul wants his audience and us to know that our identity is anchored not in the do of the law, but in the done of the gospel. That's what he wants us to know. He wants us to know that the voice which says, "just do it," has been out-volumed by the voice that says, "it is finished." So Christianity should feel like my chains fell off, not I better not screw up. And for too many people, it feels like I better not screw up, rather than my chains fell off, my heart is free. And this alone frees us from the pressure to perform, this slavish demand to become. See, the gospel that Paul so thoroughly and eloquently defends and presents in this letter liberatingly declares that we already are. We already are loved forever. We already are forgiven fully and finally. Right now, we already are in with God because of God, because of what He's done. And that means that nothing we do or fail to do will cause God to change the way He feels about us. One of my favorite, absolute favorite Martin Luther quotes is this one: "God doesn't withhold His promises because of our sins or accelerate His promises because of our righteousness. He pays no attention to either." I love that. That's not what I heard growing up. But it's true. Because of what Jesus has done for us, our slate is clean. Our God approves. We're in now. In now. Well, what does believing that do for your life? How does that change the way you approach relationships? How does it change the way you approach work? How does it change the way you approach everything? That's what Paul wants to make clear here. This going back under law that he's warning against is going back under this performance mindset, whether it be with others or with God. And he says that's just pure slavery. That's just absolute pure slavery, to fall back under this performance mindset that essentially says you are what you do, so you better do good, you better do it right. Your identity is anchored ultimately in your activity. That's slavery. We know that to be true. So here's the good news, and I'll conclude with this. Who you really are has nothing to do with you at all. It doesn't have anything to do with how much you can accomplish or who you can become or your behavior, good or bad, your strengths, your weaknesses, your past, what others think about you, your family background, where you went to school, the way you look. Your identity has nothing to do with you. Your identity is firmly anchored forever in Jesus' accomplishment, not yours. His strength, not yours. His performance, not yours. His life, not yours. So you are not what you do. You are, at your core, ultimately, you are what God has done for you. That's the whole message of this letter. And Paul is grieved, as he would be today. He is grieved at the fact that there is this performance mindset that has entered into the schema. And he's saying, don't do it. Don't fall prey to that. Don't believe it for a second. It leads to slavery. Know that you're in forever. You're free. So rest, relax, enjoy life. The pressure's off. The sweatshop is closed. Go home. Take a nap. It's okay. Let's pray together.